All right, welcome back. Episode number 145. The whole crew is here. Tom Burton, Brandon Lee, Carson Hetty. Carson, man, thanks for jumping in. I know you're working like 5 jobs now and 3 roles
It
and
feels like it, yeah. But you know what? I miss you guys. So
I know, and we miss
it
you.
worked out today. It worked out today.
So, and Brandon, good to see you. And John Jumento, welcome.
Thanks. How you doing, guys?
Wonderful, John. Excited to have you.
Yeah, so we're going to talk today. John and I were just chatting before you guys jumped on. His whole career, what he does is federal sales, right? Well, I don't think we have tons of federal sales listeners, but as I was just saying to John, and I have this from personal battle scars from this, if you can sell in federal, you can sell anywhere, right? And the fundamentals and the patience, I think was the word you used, John, the patience that you need for federal and the fundamentals you need for federal carry over into the B2B enterprise for sure. And if you can master those and whatever, am I saying that right?
Absolutely.
So,
Absolutely.
so anyway, I think we're going to have a fun conversation, some interesting topics. But John, before we get into and a little bit about your background, Brandon, want to thanks Fist Bump again, as always, for sponsoring. All in the team doing a great job. Anything exciting you'd like to announce or talk about?
No, same old. Lots of podcasts and shows, and the key there is knowing that it's not just about the show; it's what you do with the content after the show, and using the show, inviting guests, and all of that. So lots of shows, lots of roundtables. The peer-to-peer roundtable discussions have been a really great way for our clients to meet their ideal customers in a non-salesy way. So yeah. And we have another one. Alice and I have another one coming up. I'm just not sure when it is. Sometime late September, early October.
Yeah, that roundtable discussion, which was 143, I think, or a couple episodes ago, was really, really worthwhile. I think if you haven't listened to that, take a listen to it again, because I think it is the more modern selling technique, right, of the late 2025s anyway.
For sure.
All right. Well, thanks again. So, John, tell us a little bit about you, your background, and then we'll jump in with I'm sure no shortage of questions.
Absolutely. So, Tom, thank you. Brandon, Carson, thanks for having me. So, again, my name is John Jumento. I work for HPE, Juniper Networks, and I run the aerospace and defense sales team. So, my own personal mission is to grow people and investments. And some of the key accomplishments I've had was being able to turn around an underperforming team within 3 years. I also built and led a team, and I was able to get them to 100% year-over-year growth within a year. So, feel really good about what I do. Some background about me, project management, engineering, technical sales, account management, and of course, sales leadership. Been in the industry a little over 25 years. I'm originally from the New Jersey, Philadelphia region, and I've lived in the DC metro area since 1999. So I live in Maryland currently with my wife and my 10-year-old daughter.
I was just out in Maryland a couple of weeks ago, out in Bowie, Maryland, Boyie, I think,
Yep.
which is not far from DC and
right.
Annapolis and that whole area. So I'll come by and say hi next time.
Absolutely.
So, I think it's important, right? We've had a lot of people on the show that are like sales coaches, sales consultants. John is actually like Carson. He's doing the job, right? He's doing the job day in and day out, and a thing. And I think that's important to point out to the listeners. And I think, Brandon, we've been getting people asking more for that. Like, hey, can we get more people that are actually out there in the trenches doing the work? And so I just want to emphasize, John, you're in the trenches doing the work, managing teams and so forth in this, kind of potentially difficult environment that's there.
And for 25 years, so you've seen a lot of the shifts, how we've got to show up differently for buyers, how, what value equals to buyers looks different, and the tools, the technology that we have now to meaningfully engage with our buyers. So, yeah, this should be a good episode.
Hey, maybe let's start with that as a question. John, what have you seen change the most maybe in the last 25 years?
Big
Obviously, you've been
question.
in the federal world, but what have you seen, that worked or that may have worked 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, but definitely doesn't work now? I've already gone off script and we're 5 minutes into the episode.
Well, as I think through the time, so before I answer that question, one thing about me, so the entire 25 years, I also was part of it from different perspectives, right? I also did cover commercial verticals as well, but the reason I'm saying that is because I saw it from a project manager's perspective. I saw it as a technical engineer. I saw it as a pre-sales engineer as I was covering the federal government. And I'd say one of the biggest changes, especially with the current administration, is a lot of these federal systems integrators like the Lockheed Martins, the BAEs, the SAICs, right? They've been on long-term contracts providing solutions and advisement to the federal government. And you know what? Like, they're not going to stay in that seat for long, right? Not for 10 years, right? Some of the innovation becomes really stifling when you just rely on a couple key defense integrators. So I think the one big change I've been seeing is looking at a lot of the contracts and making room for a lot more small business, because more small business, more participation brings the type of innovation that the federal government needs to be able to support their mission.
So are you saying that you're seeing more opportunity for small business to break into the federal and the government, and capitalize on some of the opportunities that may be there?
Absolutely. Granted, hopefully they're not scared though,
Oh, they
right,
are.
Tom?
I guarantee you they are. Yeah.
That's
Mm.
but absolutely. As a matter of fact, the Department of Defense and Navy actually has a program that helps support a lot of small businesses get more acclimated to how they do business with the Department of Defense, because there just isn't enough solutioning and innovation that's coming in to help support what they do on a day-to-day basis.
Interesting. Now, is that because the big guys, the Martin Mariettas, or I know I'm dating myself, but Lockheed Martin and all those larger companies, they just can't handle that, or they're just not innovative and they need more innovation and a broader breadth of innovation?
I think it's that the broader breadth of innovation, especially with, I mean, things have changed so much technology wise in the last 10 years. So think about governmental processes, think about systems, think about, certain standard operating procedures. All of them have to evolve. And, the current stigma is, the government's going to keep doing if it works, right? So, a lot of it's being influenced from that. And, there's been a lot more outreach to industry saying, I need your help. I need somebody to come here and help advise me, understand, you guys are the ones who are going to give us the innovation we need, to support this nation.
John, a big part of leading the team is, ensuring that you can keep a steady hand on the wheel. And, there's a lot of noise. I mean, I would argue in your industry, there's a lot more noise than in most industries. And so, on a day to day, like, how are you as a leader? How are you as a sales leader, helping keep your team focused on what they can actually control?
So I think it's exactly that. I'm constantly defining what they can control. I'm making sure that a lot of different resources are available to help them understand and have that situational awareness. And the last thing is, and I think Tom mentioned this earlier, and I like the way he said it, I sell with my team. I'm not just having conversations with them. I play an active role in their strategy to develop their customer. So I have my role, they have their role. I'm executing on their strategy. I'm part of the discussions, not just a technical stakeholder, but the various stakeholders that have to be involved to actually do a single procurement in the government.
So you've moved up the ranks essentially through the technical side into more of the sales side, which
Yep,
has got to give you an advantage to some degree because you have that background, the technical background of the products and the technical, framework behind the products.
correct. That's why I was talking a little bit about
Yeah.
different perspective, right? I've definitely been on the business side long enough now to really understand, the difference in role. But you're absolutely right. A lot of it really comes down to, you're taking the solutioning, but why do they need the solutioning, right? Which is something I kind of go into in terms of, mission outcomes, because really that's what they're looking for, right? They care about the product or service we're offering, but at the end of the day, it's how is that going to help me with the outcome we're seeking? Can you tell me that?
Yeah. So they don't want to just know features; they want to know outcomes that are there.
Absolutely. I'm part of a nonprofit that helps military, and I had the benefit of being able to talk to the CIO of a very large military branch. And I asked her flat out, I was just kind of like, look, when you meet with somebody like me, what are you looking for? It's like, I'm looking for partnership. I'm looking for you to be researched and understand what I care about today. And I'm looking for how you problem solve against that. That's what I'm looking for, John. So when your team shows up, that's what I'm expecting the type of conversation to have. And she wasn't just talking about my account manager. She was talking about me too. So
I love that call out. I mean, John, what you just said is mission critical. And I think that's where a lot of us can fall flat. The word partnership is thrown around a lot. And sometimes I think, unfortunately, sellers and organizations pay lip service to it. You know, we throw around the word partnership, but the reality is partnership has to be earned. And I don't even like using the word, and I'll tell an executive that I don't even like using the word until we've earned the right to be a trusted partner. And to do that is exactly what you just articulated. And you heard it straight from the executive's mouth. These are things we can control. Going out and being well learned on what is transpiring in that industry or in that organization. The data is out there. Showing up well, and then uncovering like what are actual problems. You know, I tell customer executives all the time, and I'm of the same ilk as you, John. I believe wholeheartedly in, you know, being in the trenches with my team. I've got to hear what they're grappling with as well, so that I can understand the climate and the variables that they're up against. That's the only way I can meaningfully coach. And so as I'm talking to executives, really, I tell them all the time, like for instance, I'm in the cloud game. Cloud is a commodity. They can buy cloud anywhere. But what they can't get anywhere is my team and what my organization can do to uniquely partner. And we've got to look for those differentiating facts. We can't go toe to toe with our competition based on our competition's strength. We've got to think about the unique ways that we can earn this partnership. And man, what you said is super powerful, because those are things that we can control, and that is how you earn a partnership.
Absolutely. Going right back to what you're saying, how are you helping your team control? We can control that. How we show up and how we respond.
Hey, John, you mentioned also the research side, going into the meeting, research. Tell me a little bit about that. Tell us, like, what does that mean? I think, again, Carson, like you said, partnership gets thrown around a lot, and do your research before you talk to them gets thrown around a lot. And the reality is not a lot of research gets done. I mean, the thinking is going in like, hey, we're going to tell them all about us and our differentiation. But talk a little bit about that. What exactly did she mean by research, and how do we do that well?
So first I'll say and I think it's important to mention this, right? What I've seen over time when managing account managers and going into meetings with them is, you know, we go in, we talk about ourselves the entire time, right? If you look at a lot of sales training and enablement, which is a different topic, but all the training is centered around that. So we're teaching our account managers to talk about ourselves, right? So when they prepare for a meeting, they go in, it's easier to do that because that's easier information you have access to. So in answer to your question, Brandon, there are a lot of different resources, especially on the federal government side. This is the one advantage about working with the federal government. A lot of the information about them has to be public. There are a lot of data sources, both paid and unpaid, that account managers can use to understand budgeting, initiatives, political influences, right? I'll use the military as an example, right? One of their really high-level pieces of news that came out was that, you know, the Trump administration is increasing their budget. Okay, what does that mean to me in my accounts? I cover Navy. I cover this specific command. Will that affect me? Right. So, in the other part of it is, and this is something that I actually just gave a talk. I was on a panel, and I talked to a lot of local sellers who are based out of here in the DC metro area. I've yet to see a customer, and I could be wrong because, as Tom said, I covered the federal government majority of my career. They are so live on social. they are talking about what they need. They are talking about what initiatives they care about. They hold events here locally more frequently than a lot of commercial companies do. And the whole point of that is to reach out to industry, tell them I need help. This is where I need help, right? So going back to the research, Brandon, if you're not there, you're not learning. If you're not learning, you can't show up intelligently in front of them to be able to say, because, I saw an account manager walk into an Army customer once, and they hold every year a really important, industry day where they come, all their project managers talk about their initiatives, vendors they've worked with in person. One of the first things they ask them is, so what do you think about what we're dealing with now, right now, let's just say in communications, ground to air communications? Give me a little bit about what you think about that. And I've seen time and time again account managers stumble. So being researched is definitely of utmost importance. And there is a lot of data sources out there that you can do proactively, versus reactively. So along with a whole ecosystem around there, resellers, distributors, all these folks have different perspectives on working with these customers, and all have great feedback on learning about them.
So did I hear you say, John, that, and not to go off the track on the federal side, but they are actually posting and doing things on social media that gives you insights to what they're doing or what they're looking for, in addition to
Absolutely.
these sort of meetups, if you want to call them, or conferences that they are doing. I assume a lot of them are local in the DC area, or are they all over the country?
All over the country, all over the world, depending on who you're talking to, especially when you think about Department of Defense. But funny enough, they're holding LinkedIn live sessions where they're answering questions from industry, right? Those are things they can participate in, right? One of the things I remember telling a peer once who doesn't cover federal government, and he'd asked me, he's like, hey, how do your reps, if they know no one in the Army, how did they get a meeting? And I told him it was as simple as going on a website. There's an organization called the Program Executive Office of Enterprise Information Systems. And right there, they have each program manager, what initiative they're managing. And right at the bottom, it says schedule meeting with a program manager. And he just did not believe me. I said, I swear it's right there. They're metriced on meeting with you. They want to know what you do and how you help. All you got to do is put in a request.
Wow.
That's it. So that's not the same with every branch of the military, but sometimes it's not as complicated as some people think.
You mean salespeople make their jobs harder than they really are sometimes? John, one of the things that I think salespeople struggle with a lot is it's the contactability piece, and then also knowing what to say when they're trying to get that meeting with the right person. So often my sellers, they get stuck. They get siloed in certain divisions of an organization, and they're not reaching all of the addressable market. Furthermore, they're often not necessarily armed with, and it's complex. There's a lot of solution areas. And so I think people get stuck. They talk about products, or they talk about something that they think is going to be a door opener, when the reality is they need to show up talking about what's of value to the potential client, not what they think is getting them paid this year. So what would you say are some of the biggest challenges that your sellers are facing, and how are you helping them combat that?
So one of the biggest challenges that they're facing in terms of really understanding what a customer is doing is it has a lot more to do around how do I draw a correlation between an outcome they're seeking. So I gave the example of Army and communications, right? I mean, you're selling a piece of software, let's just say, that moves data around. How do I correlate that? Well, it's simple. You don't, right? So is that where you should be spending your time? Like, the Army is a really big place, just like any Fortune 500 company. So the way I kind of help them, Carson, is basically looking at their strategy, making sure that we're addressing, the areas that we can do the most help. Like, I keep mentioning the word help because I want to put that in their mind. You should constantly be asking yourself that question: how am I helping my customer? And if you can't answer it, you're not ready to talk to them.
It's got to be outcome focused. I couldn't agree more. And I think there's often a domino effect as well. I think sometimes we struggle to break in to an account fully and get to the different stakeholders that could or should have a vested interest in the work that we might be able to do together. We look at it as a gamble, right? I mean, we're risking a lukewarm to almost non-existent relationship because we don't want to tick somebody off. But the reality is that if we risk that non-existent or lukewarm relationship and try to go for a bigger piece of the pie and meet a great executive and start getting some tribal knowledge that makes us more valuable to other people in the organization, it's a domino effect. Sometimes you just need that first domino to fall within an organization. And I think that's why it's so critical to, number one, arm ourselves going in, doing the homework, doing the research like Brandon was talking about, arming ourselves with that perspective that's valuable, and then starting to glean that tribal knowledge, because then you can start saying, hey, as I talk to Mary or John or Jeff or Richard, these are the things that I'm hearing that the rest of your organization is talking about, or these are the projects that really matter. Like, how can we develop a comprehensive relationship where we can help drive outcomes across the business? I hear this is valuable here. Are you grappling with the same thing? What are you, how can I help you with that unique problem? I couldn't agree more. We've got to actually look for outcomes that we can deliver, problems that we can solve.
Bingo. And to kind of elaborate a little bit more on the question you asked me, look at the customer's peers. What are they dealing with? How did they solve the problem? Right? Even better, has somebody else in your team sold to that customer and helped them with an outcome that is important to them? Right? I'll give a great example. And what's great, Carson? You actually outline this in your book, Salesman on Fire, right? You reach out to a different division that may not be a buyer of your particular product or service, but it does play a role. So great example is information security, right? One of the things that defense contractors are dealing with right now is certain supply chain regulatory requirements that their systems need to be secure for. One of my AMs helped one of their peers with that actual regulatory requirement, and they had a successful audit.
I love that.
Yeah.
And now that's an experience and a story that person can also take into the future of their relationship. With these experiences come wisdom. And until you try, or until you go about it a different way, get out of that comfortable way of mediocrity. It's addictive. It's alluring to go to that comfortable way of mediocrity. But once you break out of it and you do it different and you show up better for customers, man, it makes all the difference.
Yeah. I'm smiling because you just reminded me of something. One of the things I like to do with some of my junior reps is I'll prospect with them. Right. I'll make a phone call, I'll send a LinkedIn message or what have you. And this is actually a pretty funny story. He was having a lot of trouble reaching out to customers and really getting them to respond. So I suggested to him, I said, it looks like you're holding back. Like, what's really the issue? I mean, you have a lot of information here about our product, and first and foremost, nobody's going to read 2 pages worth, all right, along with all of your attachments, right? So how can you change this? So I reached out to a particular person at the same customer, and I kind of said, hey, look, how can I help you? Right? Here's what I think I understand about you based on what I've read and based on what I've researched. And I basically told him, I said, don't be afraid to be wrong.
Yeah.
You work with a lot of these folks. Guess what will happen if you're wrong? They're going to want to correct you. If they correct you, you've got a connection now. Now you're talking. So put down the big bets. Put yourself out there. Even if you're wrong, so what? You may get a conversation out of it. Just don't be afraid to be wrong.
But and there's a way you can spin that into a positive as well, because one of the key elements here is to not show up like you're the expert or you're the one that's supposed to be telling them what to do. No, they're the expert. And so, but you can proactively throw things across the bow. And so I'll do something similar where I'll be like, hey, I'm going to take a proactive attempt at constructing what I think is the right agenda for our big executive meeting together, or what I think are some of the key projects and milestones that I'm hearing are of criticality here. I'm going to take a proactive stab at fleshing that out. I'm going to send it over to you. I'm going to highlight who I think are the project owners. I'm going to highlight who the project owners are on our side, because we need to make sure we have that level of alignment and mutual accountability. But I'm going to take cues from you, Mr. and Mrs. Customer. Keep me honest. If it's somebody else that owns the project, if there are people that I'm missing, or frankly, if these are things that aren't your priorities anymore, no harm, no foul. Like, let's make sure that we are holding each other accountable to this and that we're aligned and we're on the same page. Because once you get to that level of respect, mutual accountability, there are no surprises. There's no ghosting, because you're in lockstep. And if something changes, no worries. Let's focus on this other priority or whatever it is. And that's how I've seen my largest, most strategic deals happen, is that level of transparency, but also that humility. I don't need to be the expert here. In fact, I'm going to take cues from you on what's important and what's not, and we're going to move forward together.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that humility is definitely something. I think in our profession, like we pride ourselves on what we know. So we go in and we give this impression of, we want to be the smarter person in the room, but in reality, I can't be doing all the talking, right? There's so much we can learn about our customer, and, let's be honest, right? Like, unless there's an emotional connection to what we're talking about and how we're helping them, decisions are based on emotions. They justify it with logic, which is what a lot of the conversation is when we come in there and we talk. So if we're missing that part, we're missing out. And candidly, we're also, one of the things we typically don't take into account, and I'm included as part of this in the very beginning, is we're asking for their time, and now we've just wasted it if we can't help them.
John, you mentioned the emotion and logic. I find so often sales leaders tend to push more logic, facts, what we know, what we don't know. How do you lead your team into tapping into that emotion and being comfortable with it? Because we're spot on. We're human beings. We're emotional. We're going to choose the partner. There's a lot of check boxes we have to check, but ultimately we choose the partner we feel is going to be the best for us. How do you lead your team to discover that or get comfortable with that? It's just so easier to go facts, right? And so we end up training facts and processes and be smart.
Yeah, there seems to be a going trend here. Like at my last panel I was part of, I just kept saying, doing the work, do the work, do the work. It's like, John, you keep saying do the work. Well, this is part of it too, right? One of the things I actually just had a conversation with one of my folks about this, and kind of the way I framed it with him is, it's not just the person, it's the organization. But one of the big blockers to a decision is risk.
Mm-hmm.
I talked a little bit about him, like, hey, what's going to make a person make a decision? What they could gain or what they can avoid? And it's what they can avoid, especially in government. Because when you make a mistake in government, people die. You could be in the news. Nobody wants to be in the line of fire of that. So to answer your question, Brandon, I kind of ask them, it's like, what risk is it to them if they choose you? What is that person's role? What is the organization's role in whatever outcome they're seeking, right? So it becomes something where it's like, okay, now I have to work backwards. What are they afraid of if they go with me? And how do I have that conversation with them that's not product focused, but talk a little bit about, and this is where team comes in, Carson. It's, hey, I helped the customer with this similarly before. If you're worried about product integrity, let me get you a customer that's been using our stuff for years that's never had a problem. Right. So getting them to that point is kind of what I kind of help my folks do in really understanding that part. I mean, it's not as obvious for sellers, since again, it's very, find a person, pitch, go, right? Score the next meeting. But I feel like my job is to not only be there with them, but then get them thinking about how they do that, because the sales process isn't linear, right? You're going to go in there, you're going to have multiple conversations, and not all of them are going to be about product. But to make sure you're not missing that is a really important thing when you think about success in sales.
John, I want to go back to something that we were saying a minute ago about, and being as Bob says, right, there's always somebody smarter in the room. If I'm a salesperson and, a lot of times I think people our sales teams or sales individuals are afraid because they're not going to be the smartest person in the room. In fact, maybe they're the 20th smartest person in the room that's there. But what your point was, is that you're not necessarily getting credit for being the smartest person in the room. You're maybe getting credit for being the most interested and curious and inquisitive person in the room that actually can carry on a reasonably intelligent conversation, right? With the people who are smarter in the room with that. That's a very different skill than be trying to figure out how to be the smartest person in the room. Is that something also that
Absolutely.
you really coach the team on, like how to go in there and be inquisitive, how to be interested, how to carry on a conversation, even if you're not the quote unquote smartest person in the room?
100%. Like, account managers, salespeople need to go in there and recognize that they're bringing value to the customer by bringing this resource to bear, right? It's not about telling the customer they're wrong. It's they've asked for my help. So by default, I'm here to be able to provide that assistance through delivering information, through showing a demo, through implementing something that I expect an outcome, and I'm working with an engineer. They're going to come and actually show the customer that, right? They facilitate all that. They take accountability for all that. They need to be having that conversation because, again, one of the things I see way too often is an account manager will show up, they bring a resource, let me turn it over to so-and-so. They'll be doing the discussion. And that's it. And in reality, just like I'm coaching my team and you're bringing all these resources to bear, they have to coach all those resources as they come in and interact with the customer and different stakeholders.
Yeah, makes sense. So, hey, I want to change topics, but Brandon, Carson, do you have any other related questions on this before we kind of move into a different direction?
I think the last thing I'll say on this is I think often as sellers, we've got to get over that hero complex. Like we feel like we've got to show up and be the hero. And a lot of times too, Bob, as always, you're making phenomenal comments in the chat. There's a lot of responsibility that falls on the sales leader. We have to set the tone and create the culture, build the culture of how to effectively do this role correctly. I see far too many sales managers that lead with scorecards and metrics, and they just tell people to go sell more widgets. They don't tell them how, and I think that's what breeds some of these bad behaviors, or that complex that makes me feel like I'm showing up only to wait for a customer to pause so that I can say my next smart thing, or talk about my product or myself. If we can ingrain in salespeople more of that listening to listen, and I don't have to look. I've never been burdened by being I work in technology. I've never been burdened by being the most technically savvy person in the room. So hopefully it's probably my own ignorance that's helped me be successful, because I don't feel compelled to throw around all these amazing technical facts. I listen to my customers and I hear what problems they're trying to solve. And I know, based on my experience, who to bring in and what to do. And that ultimately is what instills confidence in my customer, because whatever they say, I have a feeling I know what to do, and I can walk them through an experience that a similar customer has had, or what I've done when I've seen challenges that they've had, or other organizations. John, you brought this up and I love this. Other organizations that are similar, that have had similar challenges, and get them introduced, and then get the heck out of the way and let the magic happen. Sometimes, we don't have to be the hero. We might be the catalyst for something great happening, and we've got to know our role and know our place. We don't have to be the smartest person. So, John, that was some of my big takeaway from what you laid out there, and I think it's critical that we as sales leaders own our part in that.
And I like what Bob said earlier about the difference between being effective versus being efficient. I think that is lost way too often in training and working with reps. It's a focus on efficiency, get it done, get the call, book it, write your notes, where are we at, and we don't take enough time to say what is it, because I'd rather have a sale that takes a little bit longer but becomes a positive outcome than a very efficient. And I think a lot of that gets lost in the training process, and therefore it doesn't happen in the calls where we've got discovery that we have to go through, first call goals that we have to accomplish. Too often salespeople focus on those. They don't take the time to ask good questions and let the conversation go where the client wants it to go.
Yeah. And unfortunately, I think as sales leaders, some of us are to blame because, like Bob said, we're the ones pushing that efficiency in terms of a scorecard metric or a KPI.
No, don't get us.
I was asked. Correct.
Don't get started on the
Hey,
challenge
hey,
of sales managers.
Yeah. So I was asked by a junior account manager. So I like to do a lot of informal mentoring conversations. And, one question he asked me, he was just kind of like, you seem to know a lot here. Why don't you just cover a territory? It seems like you'd make more money that way. You'd be more successful. I was like, well, it depends on what you interpret success to be, right? I love helping people. I love helping my customer. I love helping my team be successful. So that's why I do what I do. But even more so, in terms of, the customer, like you showing up is of utmost importance, right? I mean, that first and foremost is what you got to do. But, I also think that, helping your folks through it is important. And that's kind of one of the things I talked to about that with that mentee, right? I like helping people. I like getting them to that point. And, Bob also mentioned a little bit about KPIs, right? One of the important parts of my job is KPIs they're a necessary evil, right? So I look at it as my job to interpret what that means and then figure out how to help my team. I'm not going to tell them what KPI they need to fulfill, right? That's part of my job. I take that ownership. I manage up. But unfortunately, as sales leaders, it kind of sucks because we're getting hit by both
You can't
directions.
control how other people in your hierarchy are going to show up. You can only control how you show up. I try to filter a lot of the noise and the bureaucracy away from my team, but I also try to stay close enough to the pulse so that I know exactly what is happening with the customers and with them. That's why I'm in a lot of these executive meetings. And man, John, you said it so brilliantly because I look at KPIs or the metrics or the reports kind of like a doctor looking at its chart. That's how we can help diagnose potential gaps in the process or how we want to do things differently. But it doesn't mean I go back and say, wow, like, can you believe this limb is broken? Like, what are you going to do about it? It's no, hey, this is what this report is telling me. What's our process look like for driving this metric? How can we maybe tweak or revisit it? Because as you well know, like, you see the graphs that you add 1% of emphasis here every day for a year, you've got exponential growth. It's the same philosophy. A small tweak in the process may have a ridiculous shift in momentum in that KPI. But until we can interpret the data and review that with our team and come together collectively with a strategy, we're not going to make good on that report or that KPI. It's got to be a collaborative effort. It can't be a thou shalt do this way.
Yeah. I'm laughing because that mentee was like, after I explained that, he's kind of like, yeah, I think I want to be an account manager. I don't want to do that.
Not for everybody.
So John, shifting gears, we were chatting, I think, a little bit before we came on, and you were talking about some of the fundamentals that you tend to, teach your team, especially when they're going into a complex environment, lots of stakeholders, lots of moving parts. In particular, you were talking about like the different customer types and things like that. Kind of take us through that on, what are some of the fundamentals that because I think the fundamentals you're teaching your team are very applicable to probably most B2B sales, not just, certainly not federal only.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the things I ask my sellers is, after they go through a strategy walkthrough of, say, an account they're looking to cover, right? one of the first things I lead with is, hey, walk me through a little bit. When a customer says, okay, ready, go, I'm ready to buy, right? Do you understand their business enough to understand how they purchased this, right? And I need detail. And if they don't have that detail, navigating that complexity is what I feel my job is, but also the account manager's job in order to set the right expectations around the business. If you're not doing that, you're rolling the dice. And that doesn't matter if I'm covering federal government or I'm covering B2B enterprise. It's the same thing. Different people, different motivations. Being able to articulate exactly, hey, I go to so-and-so for approval for a budget. Okay, there's actually 4 people involved. Who touches this? Okay, great. Do I have access to everybody? No, we don't. Okay. Maybe we flag that as a risk when we think about, can we expect this business in the first 90 days? It's being able to speak to that level and be able to navigate some of that complexity. Now, funny story, I won't mention the customer, but I worked with a peer of mine who managed an account manager who covered a government entity, and they had this procurement system that an end user would put it into, and then it would basically just spit out approvals to whoever was involved. This system pinged 20 people to actually put signatures down in order for an approval to actually go to the contracting department to put out the bid to then award a purchase order. 20.
This is why we're afraid of federal.
She didn't do the work. Yeah. If she didn't know the customer and understand how they buy and understand that system and work with resellers who are at the front of that, because we have to work with resellers to resell to the government based on contracts. She would have not known that. She wouldn't have been able to set the right expectations around the business. Good news or bad news?
Yeah. So are the fun, you talked about some of the fundamentals of patience and so forth, but you'd also mentioned some different buyer types that you I think it was different people. What were those different roles and areas that you kind of give those foundational elements to with your team?
Sure. Well, I mentioned one, and I'll bring this up because this is definitely something that's under the magnifying glass in federal government. It's information security, right? A lot of the regulatory, things that are coming down from presidential mandates are now hitting, these information security organizations within some of the larger, and they have to enforce it, right? I'm not going in there. I'm not having a product pitch. I'll give the same example I gave Carson earlier. I go in there, I work with my team. Okay, if we can get a meeting with this stakeholder here in information security, they're concerned with our vendor because it's not made here in the US. Okay, let's find all the information we need to. Let's go have that conversation, right? If they need further validation, let's figure out what validation they need. Let's go grab that information. Let's have the next meeting with it, right? It's really understanding how we take that next step to remove some of the roadblocks, because in reality, organizations like that are part of the buy cycle, all of them play some type of influence in it, right? So another great example is the contracting officer or the contracting office. So every time an end user says, okay, I'm ready to buy, they have to work with a contracting office where they go to resellers who have a contract vehicle who they can buy from, right? Now, one of the mistakes I made early on in my career is, okay, I'm not getting information. Let me go talk to the end user. End user doesn't know anything about what's being bought over there or what the process is, right? Separation of church and state is on purpose. It's so they can't do that, right? So fundamentally understanding that is a really important thing. And knowing that the contracting officer, their job is just to go through the acquisition process. They have no investment in what the outcome will be, what the product does. They could care less. Their job is to get it out the door. So you need to figure out what they care about. And what they care about is saving money for federal government. So if you want that type of connection, you want access to that person, you've got to change your conversation. You've got to change, what your message is when you first lead into there, right? One of the things I've used in the past is like, hey, so my last job, I started a team focused on Department of Defense. We didn't really have a good process and resellers with contract vehicles. I'd call up a contracting shop when they were having trouble and say, hey, look, how can I help you? Right? Like, I manage the business here. Let me tell you a little bit about the resellers we work with to make your job a little bit easier. I'll give you all the information you need to be able to get there. I actually did that on behalf of my account manager. He didn't do that. But the point is that we're all participating, right? And me saying that I own the business can help them operationally know that, hey, look, if you want to transact in the future, let me give you all the information you need. Let me contact legal so my account manager can continue to sell.
And that sounds like 25 years of experience to me because of the tribal knowledge and the wisdom that we accumulate over time that, John, naturally to do that when you go into these situations. I love that you've highlighted not only fundamentals that are key, and sometimes it is just as critical that we not only understand the fundamentals as we understand the landmines or the blind spots that we don't want to get tripped up by. I've got so many stories of like times where I didn't know the exact buying process. There was this second legal review that another group had to do, and I got stung by it. Or there was a certain amount that the board had to approve, and I hit that number the last week of the year trying to get this deal across the threshold, and now I had to go back and rework. And I think these are things that we can accumulate. And if you've seen me ever on this show before, way back when I used to do movie references. Well, it's kind of like Anna says in Frozen. You've got to do the next right thing as best as you can. I have 3 girls, so I've seen Frozen way more times than I can count. But saying
yes.
that the fundamentals are key, but also like being able to know those landmines and those blind spots that you want to miss. And guys like John, other people in your business that have done these strategic or complicated deals, go out and look at them like Yoda, because they know what you need to do, but also what you need to avoid in getting these jobs done. And the quicker you can glean that level of information, like the more dangerous you're going to be in these situations, because you have to know that intel.
Carson, it reminds me of a movie, Twister. Remember that movie Twister, where they're like dodging the tornadoes and the cows are flying in front of them and all that stuff? And
I
you
never
have to
saw
know
the
how
new
to,
one. I was told to avoid it, but
it was all right. It wasn't as good as the first one, though. But
they never are.
Yeah.
But it sounds like the same sort of thing, right? It's like, how do you navigate through the cornfield without getting hit by a cow and a thing through the twister of things that are going on there? And I think that's a lot of the case of the B2B world.
I'd add in that too. I mean, we're talking about complex military, enterprise level, but I think asking those questions early on at any level is very important. You talk about, demonstrating partnership and doing your research. I think that's a great question for any salesperson to ask. Like, how are you going to go about making this decision? How can I help prepare you in making the best decision for you? It's such a layup way to demonstrate partnership and research and being that added value. I think Bob said earlier, like we do bring value, or we can bring value if we present it the right way. But so often we skip over that stuff. It tends to be salespeople start to get excited. They can smell a close potentially coming, and then they sprint and forget that there's still additional steps along the way where you're building great rapport, you're building great equity in that relationship by asking those questions, saying, how can I support you best in this process? Or what does the process look like for your organization or for you to make a decision?
Yeah. I'm grinning because the one thing that came to mind there, Brandon, was, as sales leaders, one of the hard parts about our job is that, like, I know that's all the right stuff to do. I know that's the process you need to follow. I know that's the things you need to find out. But what's so difficult about this job is that an account manager can do none of those and still make a sale. And then all of a sudden, I don't have to do this.
False positives.
Right.
Yeah. Take the easiest route possible,
Right,
and then rinse and repeat, and then find out it doesn't always work that way.
Yep.
All right. So, hey, before we wrap up, I have a question, John, for you. We were talking before. I've done federal sales in previous life. It scared the crap out of me. I didn't want to do it again. But you said there's a lot of opportunity potentially for small business or smaller business, right? If I'm a small, medium-sized
Yep.
business, I guess two questions. One, should I pursue federal? And two, what should I do? What would you recommend if you were talking to somebody who is a small business and may want to, take on that endeavor? And is it as scary as it sometimes appears?
It's definitely scary. I'm not going to sugarcoat that, especially when you think of being a small business. And the number one reason that is there are a lot of things that the federal government, not just defense, expect of a company in order to do business with them. And there are typically dollar signs attached to that in terms of investment. So then you have a CFO, which I've had a lot of conversations with in the past and trying to justify product features, certifications, things like that, that has to justify that position. And usually the question to a sales leader like myself is, okay, well, what's the ROI on that? Can you triple that in the next 3 years?
Yeah.
I can tell you yes, but that's not going to be the truth, right? So I think the one thing I would caution some small businesses is just knowing that it might be a long time before you see a return on that investment. And there's going to be a lot of upfront investment in order to do business in this area or this market. Now, one thing I've heard in the past that I didn't really think about before is, public sector business can sometimes act as an economic, blanket for a lot of companies. Because you know what, if the economy's bad, who's still spending?
Yeah.
Federal government. So there are advantages to varying your customer segments and what have you, but there is a price to pay, and there's a lot of effort, right? Usually involves hiring professionals like us who understand the landscape and understand how to do business, right? I said the other recommendation I would give them is there's a lot of small business programs, within the federal government that help them understand how they can do business with the federal government a lot more than I remember them being in the past. So being able to go to like a GSA and really find out, hey, how does small business do, work with the federal government if we have a product or service we want to, walk me through it kind of thing. Department of Defense has the same thing with small businesses since they try to vary rewards based on all types of businesses. Again, not to stifle innovation. We want to take as many people as we can who have great ideas out there. So that would be my recommendation.
So be patient. It's not a get rich quick thing. But I think as Bob mentioned earlier, right, it's once you get that first win and you get in the door, there's potentially a lot of upside. And the company I worked for when we got in the door with government, it was a great balancer when there was other economic issues going on in the commercial world. It was, bread and butter that we could count on. And a lot of times they did longer term contracts, multi-year, right? Things like that. So it definitely put a good foundation, but yeah, it was some work to get in the door for sure. Brandon, Carson, any final questions for John before we wrap up?
Nope.
Okay.
Go for it, Wilson.
No, I don't think so. This is a good one. I like the different perspective and looking at it from the lens of gov and public sector, but at the same time, like the fundamentals apply universally, and showing up with some unique, valuable perspective and thinking about what actually matters to our customers, what problems are they trying to solve, and being a differentiator or being that catalyst, and also the role that leadership has to play in setting the tone for this. All great key points. John, thank you.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me, guys.
As we wrap up, this conversation could have been on any sector. We talked a lot about the fundamentals. I feel like a lot of our shows, we get back to those fundamentals. And I think the reality is that too often the fundamentals just get skipped over.
Yeah. Like I go back to Phil Jackson, the Zen master. And one of my favorite books is 11 Rings. And he talks about his championships with the Bulls and the Lakers. And whether it was a win or a loss, he would say, chop wood, carry water. You got to get back to the fundamentals and doing the basics. And, whether, wherever you are in your sales year or sales cycle or whatever happened yesterday, you got to get up and do the next right thing as best as you can. John, was there anything else that, maybe philosophies or things that you're working on with your team that you wanted to get to today, maybe, but we didn't quite get the time to touch on?
I think I covered the big things, right? I mean, if I were to kind of summarize that, it's this could sound funny, but it's just really basic, right? And this is something I instill in my team all the time. It's come from a position of help. Every conversation you have, any interaction, every value you want to perceive to your customer, come from help. And then the other thing is, be where your customer is. One of my favorite sales professionals, Jeffrey Gitomer, says that in his Red Book of Selling. And it sounds so fundamental, but it's the truth. And there's so much opportunity to get in front of this customer because they make themselves available. So there really is no excuse.
I think there's a third one, Brandon, which is your favorite first principle, which is, move slow to go fast. I think if you combine that one with the two that John just meant there, you've kind of got the key first principles for successful selling here. So,
yeah,
well done. All right. Well, John, if somebody wants to connect with you, LinkedIn the place to go, or okay,
Absolutely.
great. We'll connect with John. I could send you a connection earlier. So, thank you again. Appreciate it. Great insights, Carson. Great to have you back.
Good to be back.
I've been trying to end the episodes on my own the last couple of weeks, and
You've done fine, Tom.
It's been a bit of a train wreck. So, anyway, go ahead and wrap us up.
Glad to get us back in the station. Good to see everybody. John, thank you for an awesome episode. Bob, Klaus, thanks for being on and commenting. And for everybody else out there, until next time, happy modern selling.
Thanks, everyone.